Colleagues and friends, I would like to welcome you to October 2015 Curiosita. As per tradition, we always have two speakers. One is our PhD student, Pieter Du Toit, who is a principal consultant in VNI Consultants. He will be talking about the leadership thinking and operational risk management, a holistic model based on aviation perspective. And another thing that we need to note, coincidentally, both our speakers are from aviation, and looking at what happened yesterday with ComAir at the airport. So I think they will be able to tell us more about the risks that are involved, because they are also in that field of the high risk of the aviation. I can give it to you to talk and tell us more about your project, your PhD journey. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to address you on a topic that is dear to me. But first, I'd like to tell you maybe how I feel at the moment is, in life there's certain things that you will do regularly. And then there are things that you will do less regularly, like getting married or having a child or doing a PhD discussion. So this happens once in a while, really, and I hope I can share my thoughts and my ideas with you, and I'm really looking forward to the value that you can add, to my topic. But this is work in progress. That is really my first attempt, so I take guidance from the facilitator and the questions you ask me in the process. But let me start by creating a little bit of context and perhaps a bit of an introduction from myself or about myself is obviously my worldview is influenced by my gender. It's probably influenced by my background, my upbringing. I am South African. Born and bred Pretorian in Tshwane really. I studied Northern Sotho as one of my matric subjects, but never had the opportunity to become fluent in that, but already got to understand a little bit of other languages, and that was in the middle 70s. I started with that. But anyway, my upbringing is pretty much or typical Afrikaner, South African. I speak Afrikaans in my household. I have two sisters. Pardon me. They both married. I'm not married. Don't have any kids that I know of. But anyway, yeah. And I think my culture is also providing me with that. The way I try to approach this topic, which Dr. Linda has alluded to, and I'll have more time. I'll spend more time on that. But that also informed my theory of knowledge, where I come from. And maybe that being said, my career can be divided in probably two parts, really, if I have to look at my career over the full duration of the career, which started in 1981. The first part of that was really in aviation as an air traffic controller or a mission controller. So I think that is where this topic has really, found its relevance in my existence. And there's a latter part, which I'll share just now, that also influenced that. But the second part of my career is very taken a lot of time taken up in consulting and business consulting in the mining industry. So there's kind of a bit of a difference in aviation and mining, But a lot of business consulting has gone into that, where I consulted in platinum mines, gold mines, diamond mines, actually all of them, the whole lot. And a large portion of that topic was in safety management. So understanding how people behave, specifically towards safety and that. And today in our consulting world, we use safety as the catalyst to bring about change in organizations. So safety is non-threatening. If I'm concerned about your safety, I can discuss quite a number of things with you, but without making it, personal, because I'm concerned about your safety. So I think this starts to inform a little bit of, my upbringing, my my work career, there are many experiences one can share. But also added to that is, I believe that I'm fairly well traveled. I've probably visited close to 50% of the countries in the world. And in that basket of countries, I've done it leisure, on a leisure basis, travel at grassroots level, stayed in villages, with people. But also, my consulting business took me, to areas where we do formal structural interactions, with the folk of that culture. And so we're currently doing quite a large project in India. I just shared with my guest speaker here. I've been in India, I think 17 times in the last 2 years. So I literally travel there almost every second week, type of thing, and work with people. Now, that being said, I think it's contributed to me widening up a little bit, coming from a white Afrikaans-speaking male, background, where I've seen parts of the world and interacted and interfaced with many different people and cultures and so on. And in that process of doing all of this and looking at what is the dominant, in many cases, headlines in newspapers and in TV news bulletins and things like that, I kind of developed this, I call it a misunderstanding or uncertainty or not knowing if leaders are really understanding the risk at hand. We see people move up in organizations, become leaders in this organization, and then things go horribly wrong. And I'll use a couple of examples. Polo, Volkswagen in America is a good example that's just happened very recently. We see what happened in Parmalat a couple of years back, whatever the case may be. We see what happened in FIFA, literally, a few months back and so on. But then one asks the question, but why is it that we have leaders in positions, but they somehow don't fathom and get understanding of the risk at hand? And I think that started to inform my topic, what I'd like to research. So I'd like to say, as an introduction, and I'll try to spend more time on the topic itself and try to be a little more structured, but I believe that is just a view at the moment, that the traditional approach administering risk is kind of disjointed. So when I see the globalization happening, I'm trying to say that in the past, I want to be careful talking about old days and new days and that type of thing, but maybe in an old economy opposed to a new economy. In the old days, it was easier to departmentalize what your challenges were and those type of things. But in the new economy, which becomes much more of an integrated activity and departments in organizations, I think that old model is not fitting this, the new need, requirement. So materiality, as an example, will probably be something that I will, try to incorporate in my discussion. If there are questions as we go along, please ask the questions. Yes, I would not like us to kind of end up in, so ask questions as we go along. It is also believed that the outcome of superior risk estimations are based on the leader's judgment and ability to genuinely understand the risk at hand. So what I'm kind of alluding to here is, I'm not certain that people, or leaders, and it's about the leader really, understands or can comprehend or can articulate that risk that we're talking about. Now, when you look at the topic, I'd like to focus on operational risk. So that's much more of probably a little bit generalized risk. It's about operations, and it's not so much financial risk, but it's understanding the risk for the organization and what goes along with that. So I made a couple of comments here. How much does this relate to the ego of the leader? How much does this relate to maybe greed or power needs in the leader? Now I have to be careful that I don't use that as the main thrust to understand why leaders probably end up not articulating the risk properly, because they might articulate that risk, but then steer away from it or kind of have a blind eye to it, and I need or would like to understand why that is the case. So through the research, I hope to contribute to understanding the leader's ability to comprehend and articulate risk better, and to devise a possible holistic operational risk model. Now, what I said in the beginning, my career took place kind of in two phases. The first was in aviation and the second in mining. I think this should just be as appropriate in mining if I'm, successful in achieving that model. But subsequently, what happened to the latter part of my career is I engaged on a project with ATNS, Air Traffic and Navigation Services, where my company, in the introduction you heard, is called VNI Consultants, were tasked to develop a safety management system for ATNS. So during that process and developing that system, kind of my roads joined back again with aviation, and this almost passion, I have for understanding leaders has brought me to the aviation industry to look at operational risk and the leader's ability to comprehend that risk in aviation. So when I consider a model here, and I don't have an answer to the model yet, but these will include aspects like complexity of airspace. It will include aspects like movements within that airspace. It will include aspects like the availability of surveillance or equipment or technological support, whatever, in that workplace. I don't know at the moment. I have no idea what that should or should not be. Yes, sir.
In your model, are you going to allow for something like acceptable risk? Or are you taking it on a strict line?
No, we have to be careful, in terms of risk and the definition of risk, you will have some leeway, but and that will probably come when I discuss my methodology. Is and I hope to work with an action group where we have to decide that or define that parameter. And just maybe sharing some current realities with ATNS is that I'm of the view that the safety number that they follow and try to achieve is not really addressing real risk in the organization. So that is probably part of that, is to map out what are the risks and, how should we, but thank you for that. Yes, sir.
So without probably jumping ahead a bit,
please.
Things that you're going to talk about and discussing your methodology
right.
Going forward. What you were saying prompted me in a couple of areas. One is, if you apply a little bit of systems thinking to your environment.
Yes.
I look at the two industries that you mentioned, specifically aviation and mining, and when I look at them, they are very cost-oriented type of businesses as opposed to revenue-oriented businesses. And both industries are always looking at cost management, process management, because the revenue tends to be out of the management control in many instances. Certainly in mining, whatever the ruling resource prices is what you're going to achieve. In aviation, maybe to a lesser degree, you can manipulate pricing and be quite aggressive in marketing and sales, but it tends to be they tend to be cost management type of businesses. They've also been very adversely affected over the last couple of years around changes in, never mind the economic recession, which is affecting so many industries, being strong shifts in technologies, which is meaning that leaders have to re-engineer their businesses and adapt. And I think a lot of your thinking needs to be around having a systems approach to take account of these broader aspects that are going to affect these industries in order to make your model more effective for leaders to grow forward.
Thank you very much. Now, I appreciate that. I have a pet affiliation with systems and systems thinking and that type of thing. So Senj and a couple of those guys really, and that's probably one of the aspects, that directed me into this, because I believe leaders do not see the complete system and the effect that they have, on what happens within the things that they do, and the knock-on effect. I do something here and something else happens somewhere down the line. So I really appreciate that. That is one area that I'd really like to spend a lot. And some models that I'll be using, maybe discuss later as well, but just, when you ask the question now, would be complexity of work theory, understanding those, call them difficulties or intrinsics, of people making decisions and those type of things. Most definitely. Thanks. Thank you very much for that. Any other?
Yes. I was thinking of maybe let me hear you out so that I know exactly where you are going to.
Yeah.
Because actually the questions you have been asked, they are very relevant.
Right.
But I thought perhaps by the time you finish, we would see where to put the positions and the questions and position them where they are supposed to be.
Right.
So I'd probably, if I ask you a question, I might be preempting what you are going to say, which has been said before. So maybe let's hear you out.
Okay.
You get a point,
Okay. Okay, so I plan to do the research then within air traffic and navigation services. The providers of air traffic controllers and infrastructure like surveillance, communication, airport control, and so on, along with AXA, at 23 airports in South Africa, and it includes the St. Helena project that they kicked off now through the middle of the year somewhere, and that will probably come online towards early January, February next year. So my sample group is actually, in that specific environment of ATNS leaders, and what we've done so far is we've actually put together an action group of people in that working in that fraternity of senior leaders, and where Storm assisted me in setting up a LinkedIn, which is kind of a bit slowly to get out of the tracks, but I hope after today's discussion that will get going, and that's a closed group, but we also would like to open up that group to other people in the aviation industry, to join that group and start to make contributions. Also, air traffic navigation services, apart from the airports that they manage in South Africa, they probably, they claim that they provide 10% of all air traffic controllers globally. So all air traffic controllers working in a global space have been trained by air traffic and navigation services. So they're quite a prominent organization within the aviation industry. So you guys can also give me some guidance and advice, on that methodology as we go along, because my sample group will be a small portion, But then again, aviation is not that large. It's a large industry, but the players are a lot of small players in that industry. And as I've said in the beginning, this research is in progress and it's not a final product. So I might even be a little bit uncertain in my own response, as I don't have the answers that you might be looking for at the moment. So let me come back to going now through the process. That was kind of much more of an introduction, and for you guys to understand where I'm coming from. I'm of the view that the business environment nowadays is risky and difficult, and that there are many variables in this environment to be dealt with, and the ability to predict the outcomes of these are becoming increasingly vague. And I have academic support for these things. The consequence of not knowing the appropriate risks may be aggravated, and if the organization does not respond to the pressures in time, the organization may be emerged into a crisis. And many organizations have failed to do this in recent years, and I've given you a couple of examples there. So what are those aspects that create unsafe perceptions? And those are the questions I'd like to ask and get answers to. And these are the questions I'll probably ask to the action group and get answers to, to those. We have to separate perception from actual. So, what are the realities in the industry, and how do we perceive those realities, and how do they become real? We need to try and understand if the leader has the ability to comprehend and articulate real or actual threats and distinguish them from unreal or non-threatening. And what is the emotional element in this? So these are questions that I kind of, when I make these statements about uncertainty in the business world, these are the questions I would like to then try and answer in this process. Now, coming back to your question, risk is described as the effect uncertainty has on objectives and is generally defined as the probability and the likelihood of harm or damage occurring from exposure to a threat. It's probably a little bit generalized. There are a few other definitions, but I think as a general idea, this is really what it is. And how much of that risk can or can we not accept? So again, there are questions, maybe before I get to that, that can be made in evaluating risks. All known risks can be mismeasured, not comprehending its impact or severity. So, what gets measured gets done. I don't know who said that, but it's kind of a general thing in business. What gets measured gets done. So if we start to measure something inside the organization, and we measure that, religiously, that drives actions. It drives behavior in the organization. So if the leader is not giving the support, then I come back to the model. If we cannot give the leaders the support and direction that is required, the leader might just start doing the wrong things in the organization. And they end up. The other aspect, important risks can be ignored, either because they are undetected or wrongly viewed as irrelevant. So how do we kind of create that urgency to understand what and that comes back to what the reality is. So again, questions is, what is the level of comfort leaders have with the current risks and complexities? What else or other complexities or combinations of complexities will provide a sensible and true definition of risk in aviation then? Because remember, I would like to find a way that we can measure through a model, what are these different risks that you perceive and so on. So the fundamental mistakes evaluating risk is probably found in mundane risk methods. So therefore, it is maybe needed that we look at some new model. So leaders' ability to comprehend risk should be established here. What is the cognitive ability of the leader? And I'd actually like to start looking at that. And like I'm sharing my ontology with you, is, that leader is going to be in that position of his own ontology, and where does that come from? The work that I'm doing in India now has actually showed me a lot of differences, in terms of a so-called westernized approach to risk and risk management and understanding and comprehending that risk. And even, it's quite topical in South Africa now, the word escapes me. Corruption, thank you, sir. Taking money, whatever. There are different perspectives of people on corruption, understanding corruption. Different cultures have different perspectives. So those are the things that, when I look at the mundane model, compared to a new direction and a new, creation of something that, one should actually take that into account. Were the ATCs trained maybe at earlier days, or in earlier days, did they have better exposure to experience and knowledge? So those are the leaders that now sit in positions, and therefore they can actually make, well-informed decisions around risk and those type of things. And is the new generation that's taking over from these guys, at that equal footing? And would a model like that provide them then the guidance to be able to end up at that footing? So, any questions? Comments?
I have a question.
Keep on going, okay? So the research problem is around, it would appear that the ability to identify and manage the appropriate risk suitably. It looks as if political unrest in Africa, Middle East, industries transforming, a slow-moving global economy, geopolitical shocks have contributed to the complexity of risk and decisions around risk. So I'm trying to also say, we're moving away from a localized to, much bigger. You're working across borders of countries and all those kind of things and so on. But how is this relevant to air traffic operations? These things happening, and how will those inform the measures that you will use in your risk model? So what is the significance of this statement in aviation risk? And here I make specific reference to MH370 as well as MH17. And you guys were talking about what happened to BA yesterday. Why did it happen? What happened to MH370, and why is it that that risk was not either identified previously? MH17 is perhaps more a relevant example in what I'm trying to share with you guys. Why did they fly over that airspace? Because there were other information available, known to the leaders, and they still decided to take the risk and fly over. And it's not a pilot thing, it's about the, why do we do that? Is it because of something like, what you say, driving cost, in the down, whatever, opposed to safety type of thing. So, now, here are a couple of things that I took from the Economist survey that was done in 2011, where results from the survey and some guiding personal interpretations are as follows. Managing complexity is becoming one of the biggest challenges for organizations today. Now I'm generalizing, but I'd like to funnel that right through to risk and the leader. Risk is a complex business phenomenon that is sometimes overcomplicated, and a more fundamental generic approach is required. So can risk models be simplified for easy understanding and use within the organization? And what are the denominators within that model? The risk management function is finding it hard, this is part from the survey, finding it hard to increase its authority in the organization. Now what that means, my interpretation is that, yes, we do risk. It's kind of a part of a business activity, and we try to identify risk and work on that. Is it really part of your strategy in the organization, and how does it influence the strategy of the organization? So maybe more authority required from risk departments within the organization. There are as many risk management models as there are departments or disciplines. There's a marketing risk model, there's a financial risk model, there's a operations risk model, and like that. And how integratable are those models, and what are the correct aspects that needs to be measured in that model? Little progress is made on strengthening and smartening risk methodologies and practices. Now, I had the opportunity to present in the very early days to an action group, my idea, and it was actually before I had very clear understanding of what my topic should be to a group of people. And the outcome there was that, but we have risk management checklists. We do risk audits. We do this, that, and the other thing. And maybe I could not get my idea across, because that was not the idea. I'm not trying to understand how to manage risk. I'm trying to understand how the leader perceives the risk. And it's not about leaders' aversiveness. It is, does the leader really have the cognitive ability to identify and articulate the risk? And how much does that then come together in a model for reference purpose? So certain assumptions. Any questions there, perhaps? Question?
I'd like to make a comment with regards to your problem statement.
Yes, sir.
The complexity that you bring out, saying the traditional models are under scrutiny, so you have to come up with a new model. That's sort of what I think your line of thought is. There are two elements that I think can strengthen that problem statement,
Right.
which supports the degree of control that is now impacted because of this complexity.
Yeah.
And the second one is that you've already mentioned, is the severity of the impact.
Yes.
The severity of the impact, the knock-on effect, is much more severe now than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Pan Am, as Lockerbie has introduced a huge phenomenon, 9/11, and now the severity is huge. So the impact, those three pillars, severity of impact, degree of control, complexity, might strengthen the problem statement.
Thank you.
In terms of technological developments and so on, that degree of control, how can you actually bring the risks closer to your managerial decision? And that's also something you know from a systems development background and so on, how that has changed.
Very valuable.
I don't think the risk models are adapted to actually.
Yeah, you see, just in layman's terms, I try to be, the outcome should provide leaders with hands-on information and real risk information in their organizations. And systemic, like what you say now, that is where I think, it actually comes together. Without understanding systems. You know, I mean, process is a sub-order of systems, and structure is even a sub-order of that. You know, so yes, so thank you for that. Rob, I'll come back to you.
Just an observation on a project that I've been involved in. We're taking, we're trying to be concise. We're taking legislation and we're reducing all legislation down to flowcharts. The result is that we're able to take most pieces of legislation and reduce the interpretation of that legislation down to about 85 to 90% certainty as to how it should be interpreted, which then allows the legal practitioner, judge, to then only apply his mind to the 10% of uncertainty. So I think an interesting aspect, and I can show you this methodology at a separate time, is being able to create a model's been created which actually takes all the controllable or interpretable risks, reports it, and then allows the leader or the practitioner just the ability to use his experience to be able to apply his mind objectively to the 10% that is uncontrollable or interpretable.
Exactly, and I really appreciate that input, and I think that is where I'd like to arrive. So I'd really like to, you know.
It's a world first. I can show you.
Yeah.
It's just been published now.
Yeah, because that's that insight and wisdom that is required from the leader to apply, but to have that almost a dashboard, you know, in front of them.
So just on this thing, just
yes.
to give you an idea. It's all about, this particular one's on business rescue.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it actually is allowing judges to have to reissue some of their judgments.
Judgment, yeah, you see. Because they probably now have more real and current and appropriate
But
information.
instead of them interpreting stuff, the flowcharts actually interpret it, and then they can apply their minds further down where there is ambiguity.
Right.
Rob, would you comment? Coming to you, sir?
Yes, I just want to say that major risks, or major, I suppose, risks, feed on minor risks. So there's not really any such thing as a minor risk, because those minor risks add up to major risks. So one can't really draw the line.
Well, quite correct, and that's why hopefully what I anticipate in this model is then to understand what are those smaller ones and how much do they then, and this comes to the action group, you know, and the methodology that I need to follow then is how much these smaller ones inform a bigger one, and, you know, so you actually end up with a single risk number, but it's supported and fed, you know, by many aspects within the organization. I think that's what you're kind of referring to. That's that 80 or 90%. And then when I look at that number being the leader and having experience in that organization, I can make a call.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
What I've found is I'm also being on risk, my PhD. The problem that I'm finding is that this is a very there's a high rate of immaturity in the risk return within organizations. But the problem is that if you do not know your organization, if you know your organization well enough, but not just one spot, across the board, you'll be able to isolate where the risks are. Because at the moment people are saying, I'm not giving you all my risks. Because you come in with a brook to sweep me out. And I'm not prepared for it. Yeah. So people have got to change their mindset and say, look, this is where I'm exposed. Because risk is basically an exposure which leads to an opportunity at the end of the day. But do not forget that you need to bring the risk factor in top of the strategy side. Yes, you're looking at one component of the whole risk right across the board, because that risk is across all the silos.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's got to start from there. But in operations, you need to look at where's the opportunity. So if you turn it around and say, what opportunities do we have in the organization? Where can we better ourselves? Then maybe people will understand and say, well, I'm not looking at where I haven't performed.
Yes.
But where can I better myself?
Right.
Then you use that approach that I think will change.
As leverage.
As leverage, it will
Yeah.
change the approach.
Thank you.
Okay.
You said that you are not looking at risk checklist, but you are looking at the ability of the leader or the leader perceive the risk appropriately and decide whether something is risk or whether it is not risk. But a risk factor or whether it's not a risk factor, so I should put it that way. But this leader you're talking about, is it the overall leader of the organization who's going to decide whether something has to be done or whether something is not going to be done, and he makes the final decision? Or somebody who is a risk manager? Because I'm looking at this risk as much more of a technocratic thing and not necessarily a perception thing of somebody who is a political leader. For example, I don't know if somebody, the mere fact that somebody is the CEO of a company does not necessarily mean that he's a risk expert.
Yes.
You get a point?
Exactly.
So the risk expert has to have expertise, the relevant expertise in risk identification and assessment and the possibility of occurrence. Do you get that point?
I do that, and yes.
Yeah. So the point I'm actually trying to get here is that is it going to be, is it necessarily a function of the perception of the leader, whether he is a risk expert or not?
Yeah, actually, if I may respond to that, and that links into that comment on that side, one of the delimitations of the study is not to assess the skill set of the risk manager in the organization. This is about leaders understanding what I'm dealing with. So to a large extent, it's probably the CEO. And it will be the operational leaders within the organization to understand when is this what I'm dealing with a real risk, and how much of that can I stomach, and what is the decisions, or how do I articulate that risk so I can explain it to people. And I think that's where that mindset that you're talking about comes from.
Yeah, another thing.
No, you can continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another thing is this: you are talking about a holistic risk, a model, but you are imagining to create a model for a holistic risk management. That model is going to be holistic. So I want to understand what all that you are going to include in that holistic. Because if you talk about holistic in the air traffic, you're talking about air traffic control, right?
Yes, air traffic control.
Air traffic control,
yes.
Particularly. So air traffic control, how does it work now? If you take off, if you lift a kite, a plane, okay, and begin to take him from the what do you call it, from where he starts to the destination.
Yes.
That's where the air traffic is actually taking place, right? So the risk that is happening there is purely
Yes.
It's a purely technological thing.
Exactly. Yes.
That the engineering of the
by the nature of the activity.
Yeah, and the natural environmental air conditions circumstances that it is dealing with when it is projected through the space. So then, what are you talking about? The politics that is on the ground, or the politics that is in the air? And the holistic here is exactly what I'm trying to actually understand.
So let me try and respond to that. I think that's a very valuable question, and that's some of the challenges I face in my own thinking, with this. But I made a comment here. So, what is the relevance of this model and the question you're asking, in terms of strategic risk, systemic risk, process risk, and those type of things? So you see, I want to move away from, if I may say or call it now, a traditional way of approaching and looking at risk, is to say, but in my structures I have risk, and does the leader understand structure? And it comes back to what you said about systemic thinking. So what systemic risks are there in the organization? So it's not about financial risk.
You're not talking about financial risk.
No.
And you don't think the financial risk can
have an effect. Now you see, financial can be structural, it can be systemic.
Yeah.
So if I can identify that through my strategic planning processes as one of my systemic risks, then I can address that risk.
I read one paper somebody wrote on risk identification and management. It is actually, he was adopting something called a fuzzy set theory. I don't know whether you've heard about a fuzzy set theory. Please go and look for it.
Yeah.
Fuzzy set theory in risk management. What this guy is actually contemplating is the reason why I'm actually mentioning this is this, because it is possible that you are going to. What I was going to ask you was how you are going to categorize this risk, because you are saying the very big ones and the very small ones. You know, that is a bit difficult, because you know, very little thing that is considered to be insignificant has an effect that would, you know, if it eventually happens, you know, if it eventually occurs, you wonder it has such a magnitude of effect that you wonder how you, this is so little thing that actually did so much of it. So what the guy did actually did with the fuzzy set theory, if you understand the fuzzy theory, you have to understand it from his conceptual perspective, right, and the mathematical whatever. Then you see the scope of relevance. You know,
it's quite wide.
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
So all the factors that play inevitable roles. It's not something you are going to now begin to graduate their what's the rank.
Oh yes.
Their relevance. You rank this one 50, rank this one 80, rank this one 100. This is more important than this one. It's talking about something that has an inevitable role.
Yeah.
Whether it is small, just find out exactly the role it plays in that particular situation. If it doesn't play a role, you cannot diminish it, or play what's the opposite of diminishing, or increase it through a ranking system.
Yes.
That is statistical and not mathematical.
You see that?
No, let us also avoid the argument.
Yeah. But that is an important aspect that you say, and I'll give you one example that's maybe not directly relevant to the leader and decision making in that organization, but we find that in air complexity numbers, you find that airspace like OR Tambo, which is much more movements and much more difficult joining and that, will have less occurrences than George. So, but I mean, we have to be careful how we define this. Yes. Thank you. That I really appreciate.
Peter.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned risk models and types. You also made an example about marketing. Which one do you think is always having a higher risk amongst your types that you mentioned?
I think financial risk is probably taking. You know, when you do research, whatever, there's a lot of aspects on financial risk. You know, and when you look at careers, people actually become risk management consultants, you know, and they can manage your financial risk. But when I spoke about materialization a little earlier, you find now that's almost like fractal, you know, bits that works across the organization, that it's not only financial risk. It becomes a combination of these things. Now, this BA incident that happened on the runway in OR Tambo, how much does that impact on the public profile of... Now, and I, having inside knowledge, there was another incident that happened a little earlier before that, and it had to do with radio telephone, or, you know, which, because it's inside the organization, I will not share much more of that, but because it was inside the organization, the public would not know about it. The BA incident, the public knows about because it's out on the internet and everybody sees it and that type of thing. However, this other incident that happened had a much higher risk profile in the organization, and that can do a lot more harm to the... And talking to the guys in-house, it is something that they probably could have prevented from happening. And that is where I'm coming from, is why did the leaders not anticipate this happening, and why did they not go through a process in identifying these are risks and made something do something about it?
Touching on almost like a level of accountability as well, where if it's in public view, then there seems to be more
attention given and sure.
Attention given.
Yeah.
Specifically from an aviation point of view, if you look at the way that, for example, CIA do their audits and so on, it's almost as if you have the system that happens, and at certain points they almost you interact with it and see whether it's safe. And maybe you should consider looking at those points, or whether they're also relevant to stopping the inevitable incidents that happen. So when the chain starts, at what point can you as management actually intervene in that process and actually have a control that you can put in place? Whether they, how can you change that?
See, those
awareness around that.
correct. And those are the aspects I hope to then, through this action team, whatever, unpack and then repack them into what I then call structural risk and systemic risk and those type of things. So you need to go through a process of identification of those, unpack them, understand the measures inside each one of those, and how you will actually gather the information, in the organization, on what basis, kind of automate, I don't know.
What you need, sorry,
Okay.
what you need to do is that, and I've seen this, it's basically a snapshot. I mean, I've got a model of NASA space station. We through my research that I've done, they've actually pinpointed, they've got the whole diagram of the space station, and it's split, it's broken down into layers, and they've actually, where the risk areas are, they color coded in red. And then you've got green and you've got orange.
It's like a map almost. It's like a
map. It's a picture. A picture tells you a story with all the risk areas.
Sweet spots or whatever they call it.
And you just need to get what's behind it.
Yeah.
But you get a screenshot of where it is.
I also think, just to add to the accountability comment, is if you look at what the risk is and what the accountability is, that the sort of hidden risks that nobody sees, how can you create that sense of accountability? So do you involve CIA, maybe give them an access to this dashboard to say, okay, this happened, in terms of you're not being able to hide it.
That's, thank you very much for that. Perhaps I can move on a little.
Yes,
I think so. And I want to cover just maybe two further topics. My research objectives would be to describe the interdependent nature of the leaders' thinking perspectives and formulating the perceived risk by way of appreciating and demonstrating the integration disposition, connecting those with each other. So the notion of, is risk a risk? When is it a risk? What is the cognitive approach or manifestation or processing required to establish if that is a risk? So that's one objective. Identify and develop alternative leadership dimensions that may favorably contribute to the quality and relevance of risk detection. So I'm not suggesting that I'll come up with a psychometric questionnaire or something like that. It's not that, but just understand what are those aspects. And there's some work done on that, already, and reading that. Validate the proposed required levels of leadership thinking complexities to detect and ascertain relevant risks for air traffic operations. So this is air traffic operations and air traffic management. Identify and describe these elements associated and how to integrate them into this model. Demonstrate the relevance of the viability of single and generic risk models for air traffic operations. So what I'm trying to achieve through that is to say, but can there be a single risk model including all these different snippets and bits and pieces, into one model? What are the perceived benefits from that, and provide argumentative analysis to increase the authority of risk management functions within organizations. Some delimitations of the study. I already mentioned about population, and you guys can give me some guidance and advice on that. It is a small area. Time constraints. It is actually a lengthy process of conducting face-to-face interviews. Alternative and more affordable means of data gathering will be considered. I plan on doing triangulation. So I think the biggest part of the research will be around qualitative work through the action group and having those kind of things. But I'd like to support that with a questionnaire that we can send through the organization, and perhaps not only look at the CEO, but get a different perspective, on different levels and experience of people in leadership positions on that. That's that. And then some sub-questions I'd like to ask. Is there interdependence between the leader's thinking perspective and formulating the perceived risk for air traffic operations? What is the connection and how is it appreciated? And how can it be sensibly demonstrated? Is there an alternative leadership dimension not yet defined? And what is this? What are the proposed requirement levels for leaders thinking complexities to detect and ascertain relevant risk? ATC management is different from ATC operations. So you also need to understand that. And managing a safe airspace. Which elements constitute a holistic integrated risk model? I think it comes back to the question that you've asked. Can risk be defined and managed through a single? I've mentioned that. Yeah, I think that's about those aspects. I can share with you guys the topic and maybe a little bit of a breakdown of the topic. There's a couple of more minutes available. Or would you like to use the time to ask some more questions?
Yeah, I think let us have more comments and more questions. Yeah.
Could I give you enough information, food for thought?
I must say, I had a little sneeze when you raised the issue of how you're going to go about something designing. I heard something about CEOs and stuff. Maybe we're going lower, but I didn't actually hear how you plan to approach this something, development of this something.
So we've identified a team in the organization of 7 senior managers that will be part of an action group. And those people will then assist in widening the sample through relevant positions in the organization. But this is an organization with...
Are you using snowball?
Am I using?
Is it a snowball sampling?
Snowball sampling, correct, yeah.
Okay, sir?
Just a question I would like to understand as someone that air traffic control environments are ultra stressful. I worked with someone that says air traffic controllers don't last.
Yeah.
Working to a certain age and they're gone. Now I'm just thinking aloud, what impact does that have on someone leading people that are so stressed? Would that not have an impact on their risk appetite and ability to make decisions? Because I've got to understand that environment is like, you've got to be like on some powder to just like
It is a stressful environment, I suppose, but it's probably not the most stressful environment. But that's a relevant question that you're asking. You see,
they deal with such a lot of issues, and I mean, the risk of making a mistake would be like.
Now there's a lot of talk around human factors within aviation. That's one aspect. The other one is also fatigue management, and a just culture. And those are probably some of these small elements that we're talking about, is to understand and interpret those type of things. Now, I think you're quite right in your assumption or your expression that air traffic control per se is a very stressful job, but that's the guy in the tower doing the work. We also need to look at how do these people manage air traffic controllers, and what is that information?
My concern is looking after the stressed troops.
Exactly. Thank you, sir. Yes.
That's actually just a contribution to that. See that German boy that launched the aeroplane and killed how many 200 and something
192 people.
Yes. So the state of his mind. And whatever thing that led him to do that is not always, imagined. In you are talking about the conventional risk management, and you're thinking of bringing in something, entirely new and holistic, actually. So, in this, whatever your understanding of holistic is, or how you are going to establish, where are you going to put in this kind of little things?
You see, that thing is not so little. I'm privileged to have a little bit more knowledge and understanding of that specific incident. And they were build-ups of certain things that happened, in that organization. Yet the leaders did not decide to either stop or do something, intervene. And that's my question. Why is that the leader will not comprehend that is a real risk?
Would it not be possibly a scarce skill? The issue of a pilot. You don't pick up pilots. Pilots don't grow on a tree. It takes a while.
I don't know. We have to ask the pilots that.
So you need to think of it. I mean, that story of the German pilot, they knew about anesthesia, medicals, a couple of things.
There are a couple of things that's, you know, if you look at the root cause analysis.
Pilot is a shortage.
It's because of the shortage of skills. Someone said, I'll take the risk, but nothing will happen.
That's yeah.
So shortage of pilots might be a risk also. Might consider it as a risk. So we need to develop more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's human capital development.
Mm-hmm.
Human capital development.
Human capital development, you know, and what is the impact or influence of that? Okay.
Yeah, that is true.
Is it a shortage of pilots or company failing to employ pilots? I mean, you need to look at it. Because company tend to say, let's reduce cost by not employing many pilots.
So do we have pilots who are looking for jobs?
That it can be a shortage of pilots.
There's a shortage of good pilots.
Yeah, that's I
And they're employable at a cost.
But if I may,
Okay, Rob.
I'm probably the only business CEO in this room today, possibly. And let me tell you that business is so complex. There are things that jump out at you day after day that you don't expect. That you cannot have a CEO who knows a great deal about any particular department. All he can do is know a little bit about each department. But it is the head of the department, if they're controlling risk, who must really be the operative person, the person that really takes the decisions.
Sure.
My question
I'm gonna allow two speakers now and then we close. Okay, sister.
I was saying my question dovetails into yours. Are you using the terms manager and leader interchangeably? Because as the gentleman says, a leader is looking at the strategy, per se, of the airline or risk. And it's the manager who's looking at the technical details on a day-to-day basis. And I think maybe in your study you need to be very clear. If you're using the terms interchangeably, if you're talking about a company, what does the leadership do and what does management, so that there is clear insight into the topic.
Thank you. I'll definitely take it.
Okay, sir.
There's one thing that's actually concerning me, and it's in the aviation industry. When you do an internal audit, what do you audit? In that very specific component, which is aviation, because you can follow controls, but at that point in time, how do you know that you will apply those controls? Because every circumstance is completely different. Sure. Yes, I do know they use internal audit to audit a risk-based approach. But to me, I don't believe in that because that's totally different. If you look at an audit and see that you're doing what you're supposed to do. Now, in your particular case, you can't do an internal audit. You have to go in and make sure that your checks and balances are in place to make sure that they're done. But then, at the spur of the moment, it's how you react. And that's based on how you've been trained and the experience and the skill that you have to be able to resolve that particular situation at that point in time. Because you can't, like you said, it pops up, it just jumps at you and says, hey, I'm here. Hello? I mean, like this incident with that landing gear.
Yeah.
I mean, that just happened.
Yeah. It's like the definition of discretion.
That's right.
It's what you do when you don't know what to do and there's no way of knowing.
Correct.
That's a bit of a talent. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Just a little one, please.
Okay.
You know, this has to do with the methodology you are going to employ here.
Yeah.
It's important to delineate, because you just made mention of interviews and other stuff, qualitative or whatever. This is the way I look at it. By the time you crystallize this properly, by the time you finish with the literature,
Yes.
I don't know how deep you have gone to the literature to find exactly what you are going to do. Because I'm sure there probably is a huge amount of literature out there,
Right.
particularly on the subject of risk
Yes.
first, before you can apply it in your area.
Right.
But there are so many of these issues, you have to be able to delineate the ones that will be technological
Okay.
and the ones that will be human.
That's right. And it comes back to what that lady
You
said.
get the point,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, sir.
So And the technological ones are not necessarily going to be issues you're going to get through interviews. You just have to deal with the technological systems. So to an extent, to see whether what is there already is good enough. You get a point. Well, that's how I'm looking at it.
Thank you.
Then before you now go to the human aspect where you are going to ask questions here and there to find out what. So I think it's going to be a balance of quantitative aspect, technological, and the qualitative aspect. Somehow, but you're going to deal with that. You're going to do literature on the subject matter and the literature on the methodology.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mika. Percy, the last one.
I just think something that I thought about while on the topic of holistic and how you define it. I think that in aviation, the problem that exists is the fact that everything is broken down into parts. As for example, an airline, you operating on, say, part 121, and you have an operating license and a quality manual that looks at safety and how you proactively prevent incidents from happening. But very few organizations actually have a view of the other parts as well. So how, for example, does pilot shortage influence your ATC safety model or risk model as well? And then the information is available, it's just not sort of linked up and silly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Percy. Thank you, Peter, for a good presentation, and I wish you the best of luck.